Welcome to the Early Years series. This is part 1 of Streetscapes and Houses. Nambour was originally called Petries Creek. However, it was renamed in 1891 after a cattle station owned by William Samwell. You may not believe it, but this is Curry Street, Nambour in 1915, over 100 years ago. Looks very different, doesn't it? The first settler here was Matthew Carroll. He used to live in a bark hut right where the Nambour Bowling Club is now. Palmwoods was originally known as Merriman's Flat. However, when the railway was being built through the region, the name Palm Tree was chosen due to the lots of pickerbean palms that grew in the area. Later, it was changed to Palmwoods. The area around Palmwoods is heavily timbered, and the early settlers were called timber getters, and they concentrated on the red cedar, beech and pine trees. This is Blackhall Street in Wombai in 1918. Wombai was originally called Middle Camp. When the gold was discovered in Gympie in 1867, the government built a road connecting Brisbane to Gympie. It was completed in October 1868, and by November of the same year, Cobb & Co coaches were carrying passengers, mail, goods and gold between Brisbane and Gympie. The halfway point was Wombai, hence why they called it Middle Camp. It wasn't just Cobb & Co coaches and the timber getters with their large bullock teams that used the road between Brisbane and Gympie. These smaller carts used it as well. These carts are called sulkies. This is Cribb Street in Landsborough, 1916. Landsborough was named after William Landsborough. He was the first explorer to cross the continent from north to south, and also one of the people chosen to lead the expeditions to find Burke and Wills. This is another photo of Cribb Street in Landsborough, 1916. The first pioneers of Landsborough, or Melham Creek as it was first called, were timber getters who passed through with their bullock teams, hauling massive logs to be transported to the Campbellville sawmill. As you can see, the road would have been quite rough. This is a busy day in Mullaney in 1908. Lots of bullock teams are hauling timber out of Mullaney. In the background, you can see where the timber has been cut down. Mullaney derives its name from a small village of that name in Scotland. This is Memorial Drive, Yamundi, in the early 1900s. Yamundi, with a railway and road passing through it, developed as an important centre for the timber and dairy industry. Here you can see lots of bullock teams hauling timber to the railway yards to the left of the photo. This is Bulcock Street, Caloundra, 1935. The name Caloundra was derived from the words in the Gubbi Gubbi dialect, which meant place of beech tree. Thomas John Ballinger became the first permanent European resident in Caloundra. In 1881, he built his house on the highlands behind the Lake Carramundi, known as Ballinger's Hill. Later, we would know it as Battery Hill. The first settlers taking up their farming land went out clearing their land to plant crops. As they did, they used the timber to build slab huts or humpies. These were the first homes of many pioneering families in the early 1900s. This hut typically shows the roughly constructed bark and shingle roof of the slab timber walls. Most were built near creeks for access to water, which would be carried up to the humpies in tins. Again, this is early 1900s. As farmers became more settled, they built more substantial homes for their families. This is a typical house built in 1920 on the Beerburrum Soldier Settlement. The house now has a tank for water, but still no electricity. This little timber house was built in the late 1890s. Features iron roof, hopper windows which open out to the front veranda. The fence is made of saplings and wire netting. Everyone is dressed in their best clothes for the photograph. This is another early style of house in 1892. This is the Tripconi family's home in Cowiebank on the Pumice-Stone Passage. Now you can see a different style of home. This is in the 1930s. The Harris family seaside house in Mooloolaba Esplanade in the Mooloolaba, 1934. Their swimsuits looked quite different too, didn't they? This is another photo of the 1930s. These are houses along Picnic Point Esplanade in Maroochydore. In a similar area along the bank of the Maroochy River in Maroochydore, this is the 1950s. You can see now the different types of building materials being used. Unfortunately, many buildings and houses were burnt down in the early years. There was no electricity, so candles, lanterns, and gas lights were used as a source of light. These buildings were made of timber, so if a candle or lantern was knocked over, fire took hold very quickly. Some buildings and homes from these early years are still standing. When you next visit or drive through one of these early towns, see if you can spot them and see what changes have happened throughout the years. You could also take notice of the different material to build buildings and houses today compared to those in the photographs. What other differences did you see from the early townscapes and houses of those of today? Have fun talking about it and picture yourself walking down one of the streets of the towns, or maybe living in a slab hut. Thank you for listening.